Good evening and welcome to the second in our Edmiston Talk series. Tonight we are focusing on the state of education while coping with the pandemic. Our distinguished panelists include Dr. Alvin Thornton, Chair of Prince George's County Board of Education, Pamela Boozer Strother, also from Prince George's County Board of Education, and Ms. Rosita Roy, a special education teacher, Maria Jose Toledo, a parent of the school-age children, and my co-host, Maryland State Delegate Alonzo Washington. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'd like to say that Dr. Thornton is the chairman of the Board of Education, serving in his fourth term as board chair. He is a retired Howard University professor who has two daughters. They are graduates of the school system, Prince George's County. Three of his four grandchildren are enrolled in the Prince George's County school system. And District 3 member, Pamela Boozer Strother, she is an elected official from the school board. In 2018, she's a representative of the Prince George's County School Board, District 3. Born in Prince George's County, she returned 13 years ago as a resident of Brentwood. Ms. Boozer Strother is a parent of a third grader at Mount Rainier Elementary School and a dedicated activist. She is a big proponent of the Board of Education Community Schools policy adopted in 2018 that will bring expanded healthcare and social services to our students and families in partnership with government, business, and nonprofit and faith-based organizations. Rosita Roy, she believes that all students have the capacity to reach their fullest potential and become successful adults. Ms. Roy taught in the District of Columbia Public School System for 29 years as a special education teacher. Ms. Roy's mission throughout her teaching career has been to provide students with different learning abilities, opportunities to grow both academically and socially. She is a partner of a nonprofit organization that is Attainable Resources that teaches and prepares young adults with disabilities workforce development skills. Ms. Toledo, a parent from Guatemala City, moved to Washington, D.C. in 2009. She worked for different government institutions, supporting programs for women and children. It's a nonprofit health organization in Washington, D.C. Maria Jose has two children, ages 6 and 4, and her family has been residents in Edmiston since 2014. I'd also like to introduce to you my co-host this evening, our very own delegate, Alonzo Washington, who will introduce himself, Mr. Alonzo Washington.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you and the residents of and the town of Edmiston for having me tonight. As some of you know, I represent District 22 in Annapolis, and it's the 22nd legislative district that represents Hyattsville, University Park, Greenbelt, Edmiston, and many other places in our county. And so we have an opportunity here today to really talk about some really great issues. My background is on education and education issues. So I'm in the House of Delegates. I'm the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and also serve as the chair of the Education Subcommittee. And I'm the first African-American and first Prince Georgian to ever hold that position of education policy that guides policy within the state of Maryland. But just on a separate note, as we're going through the country's, as we're going through a change in our country's history as it pertains to policing, our county executive has appointed me as the co-chair of the Prince George's County Police Reform Commission. So I look forward to having that discussion with our residents in Evanston and throughout our district and throughout the county as a whole on that discussion as well. Mayor, I don't know about you, but I am excited about these panelists and these people that are here today and about what they're going to give us today and the answers that we have to our questions. So I'm excited. How about you?
Yes, yes, thank you. So let's go to it, right? So thank you all for taking part in this discussion. And we'll start with our first segment, which is the initial reaction to the pandemic. So in late February, news about the coronavirus was front and center. And as the pandemic worsened, school systems began closing. In March, the state closed Maryland school systems through the end of the month, with plans to reopen late April. But in the meantime, distant learning started. It was then determined schools weren't able to reopen, but would continue distant learning through the end of the school year. So,
Dr. Thornton, I would like to ask you a quick question about the plans that were taken and the actions that were taken when it comes to distance learning for our county. What were some of your initial thoughts of where we should go forward with distance learning?
Well, first of all, let me say to Mayor Gant and to Doug Washington and my fellow panelists how honored I am to be with you all. The Board of Education, first of all, understood before we got to a response to distance education operationally, it was that we had to have a leadership concept in which people could have confidence. That is the Board of Education and our CEO, Dr. Golson. So the first thing that we did before we got to what we were going to do was that we had to construct the leadership concept in that environment. And that was the most important thing. So Doug at Washington, I'm most appreciative of the way the board came together as a unit, the policy unit around Dr. Golson. That was very important. We spent time in our meetings constructing that. So the face that you now see of collaboration, togetherness, no division about how we are responding resulted from that. That's the first thing that people have to understand. Then we charged our leader, Dr. Golson, she is our leader, to go forward to construct a team of people who would respond among her chiefs. And she did that excellently, to form a team of her chiefs in order to develop a plan that would immediately move us to alternative and distance education. And I think it's almost universally agreed that what that team has done with the board's endorsement now is something that the county can be very proud of. In fact, I would say, Doug, that Washington is something that the nation should try to emulate.
No, absolutely. That sounds great, and we all believe in Dr. Golson and the work that she's doing, and also the board and the board and how they're operating right now too. Let me go to school board member Boozer Strother. Can you just tell us a little bit? We know that this pandemic came out of nowhere for all of us, and we already had budgets set. We also had to approve budgets. Can you just tell us about some of the reallocations that had to happen within the school system budget in order to make distance learning work this coming school year?
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Mayor Gant and Delegate Washington, for co-hosting, and pleased to join the panelists this evening and welcome all the viewers. So, I mean, I think first and foremost, when we realized that all the students would need to be able to learn from home, we immediately had to understand our technology gap. And those are the Chromebooks that are in our classrooms. We had been working towards what we call one-to-one in the school system, that all of the students would have a laptop to bring to and from school, but we weren't there yet. So immediately with the emergency funding allocations that did reach Prince George's County, about the 30 million, we immediately had to make a plan to purchase 50, increase that. Now, we didn't realize at the time that this would go into the fall, but we were positioned to buy 50,000 coming into the fall. So immediately we had to get our students online. We spent budgeted $2 million to fund connectivity, Verizon and Comcast, and hotspots to be delivered to homes. And this was, it wasn't just the funding and the equipment access. This was, we had to have the human resources to go back into buildings that were closed, and parents to come to those buildings in a safe manner when we weren't fully understanding the spread of this disease. We were at, I think, 6 foot distancing. I'm not even sure everyone was wearing, we were just beginning to all wear masks. So, we immediately saw those budget implications.
And I think I would add, if I could, Pam, I'm sure that you would want to say that one of the things we had to do was to make sure that our children were fed continuously. And because one thing that runs throughout, I want the viewing audience to understand, one thing that runs throughout the board's work in the response, Mayor Gant, is equity. That is the most important theme that runs throughout everything that we look at, is equity. We have exposed students in our system. There are gaps, and this board is focused on that. So you saw an aggressive effort on the part of the board, Dr. Gosen, to feed our students, or continue to feed them, and indeed expand the feeding. So that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, Dr. Washington.
Dr. Thornton kind of got ahead of us. That's one of our questions to come, that equity. So yeah, that's very important. Thank you for those answers. And I just want to go to our teacher. So as a teacher, what adjustments did you have to make as a teacher as a result of this pandemic? Not
Yes.
anymore.
Yes, there were many adjustments to be made. The technology piece being a major adjustment, because this was like an emergency situation, and most teachers were not trained to use a Google Classroom at this point. And so not only did we have to be trained virtually, we also had to train our students, and they all had to get email addresses, and then we had to train many of the parents also. So this was really big for us. And initially it was not the smoothest transition, but it was the best we had. So we just had to dive in and do our very best. So that was major. Also, once we got going with Google Classroom, and all set up, and most kids had computers and hotspots. An issue was many of the students did not always show up for our sessions. And that was difficult. So then we had to look at wraparound services. And because I work at a DC charter school, we would bring in our social workers, our behavior specialists, and speech pathologists, everyone in the classroom with the students to make this work. In addition to town hall meetings for parents, because, many of the parents just didn't understand this, and they weren't pleased about it because they didn't understand. I mean, we didn't understand it all. We have to be very flexible with this, and as changes come about, as we learn new things, we make adjustments, and sometimes it's very hard for those of us who really want to know the outcome of this, and we don't know thus far. So those were the type of adjustments we had to, to bend and be flexible, and we still do along the way.
So let me ask you, Ms. Roy, you said some of the students didn't show up. So what are you thinking that some of the reasons that they didn't show? Was it because they did not have internet access? What were maybe some of the reasons that they did not show?
Well, we tried to ensure that all of our students had laptops, Chromebooks, and hotspots, okay? So I don't think that was the reason. We have many stakeholders in this situation, and parents really have to be on board. A lot of times they don't understand, how important this is. For younger kids, it's very difficult because a lot of them, they can't manage the technology on their own. So, some of our parents had to work. And so young kids, were in positions where, they had to navigate this themselves. And it's been difficult, so I think that's part of the problem. And then some of our kids are transient, they're from here to there, and it's just been it's been difficult. We need everybody on board and everybody to try to understand that, no, this is not easy, but right now it's just essential for safety.
Right. Yeah. Ms. Toledo, as a parent, what adjustments did you have to make as a result of this?
First of all, I want to say thank you for the invite.
Mm-hmm.
And well, as a parent, in my case, well, as you mentioned, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Obviously,
Bless you.
they want my undivided attention.
Mm-hmm.
We're very grateful that my husband and I were able to continue working from home, but that also puts a problem for us. The biggest challenge for us basically was to adapt our work schedule to theirs and to be able to do their school assignments with them because they're so small. We are not teachers. I'm not a teacher. So it was also, as Ms. Rosita say, learning how to teach our children how to do their assignments and how to cope with them, also because they need to adapt to this mode of learning. But the teachers were with us the whole way. But that was our biggest challenge, how to manage our work schedules with their school assignments. But I feel like that's not the case for every household. I think that there has been household, or we have learned of household that they have changed their work schedule entirely, meaning that maybe one parent had to stay fully at home, or maybe one parent lost their job because of it and they had to stay. Also, they had to change their budget because, you know, maybe their school is not providing the laptops or the hotspots, like Ms. Rosita say, but they needed to purchase it because the children needed it. I mean, the living conditions in general have changed for everyone. But for us, that was the biggest change, how to teach my small kids to do their school assignments, how to adjust my work schedule to their needs.
Right. Yeah. I think that's one of our school board's concerns as well. I think Dr. Thornton kind of tapped into that as far as food and equity for our students, especially with them being home. And correct me if I'm wrong. Especially when we talk about budget, is there anything that Dr. Thornton or Ms. Boozer Struther that you had to consider with budget for those parents that are home with their children, that they have to feed them the breakfast and the lunch that they usually get at school? Some of the Title I schools that are feeding the children breakfast and the lunch. Was that considered?
Well, it was certainly considered budgetarily. Thankfully, for the 2.5 to 3 months of the last school year, we essentially had the budget that we could reallocate and reprogram to deal with those periods. And thankfully, as Ms. Boozer's brother pointed out, the additional CARES money came in about $30 million, and the board reprogrammed about $7 million for that purpose. So that's why you saw, and I'm just very appreciative of the expanded feeding centers that you saw all over the county. It did reveal graphically something that the people of Prince George's County knew, but they hadn't seen so graphically, and that is the food insecurity of many families and our children. And so that's going to be magnified going forward in the first 2 quarters. But hopefully this is where, and I'll look to Doug at Washington and others to deal with, this is where local, state, and local income stabilization for families is so important. Because the Board of Education can only do so much in that space. And this is where we must have state and local funding stabilization from the federal government so that they can make sure that we have resources to hire people, hire these parents, they don't lose their jobs, their businesses, et cetera. Because all that stuff spills down to the Board of Education and the school system.
Yes, thank you. So we're going to move into our second segment, but is there anything else that, any final thoughts as we move from this first segment, from the initial reaction to the pandemic from any of our panelists?
I just want to say this because, and then I'll be very brief for Pam. I just want people to not take for granted the kind of unity that's been displayed from the federal to the state General Assembly to the board to the county executive. Many communities around this nation are all frayed. You'll see it. People are tripping all over each other, legislators. We're not seeing that. We're circling the wagons at all levels around our babies. And I can't stress enough the importance of that. It's going to get tough on August 30th when the schools reopen. So the unity that we are showing now as a leadership concept, Mary Gant, that is so important.
It is. It really is. Thank you very much.
And I just want to add, as a board member and a parent, really where I was in, those early weeks and into this fourth quarter, moving along was, I mean, the teachers were just amazing. Like I was blown away by just the teachers in the building where my son was having his fourth grade year. Their pivot, and what the love they brought, and instantly became public health information officers, telling kids why they need to stay home. We have the stay-at-home mandates, and saying we're still with you. And of course, to Dr. Goldson and all the administrators and the entire staff and nutrition services, that's nutrition services staff, week over week, we kept growing, and we had to more staff be comfortable leaving their homes in a very scary environment. So I just have to say, like, seeing our school system employees, that'll just stay with me forever. Just the care.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's move into our second segment. We're going to talk about budget, plans, and implementation. I was going to say implementation. Delegate Washington.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And as we all know, that our budget and the plans that that are moving forward, coming from Dr. Golson and the school board, are really important, and implementation is really important. But as Dr. Dorton said, equity is really important. In my time in Annapolis, this last session, and working on the Kerwin Commission, or the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, of sending more funding back to our school systems, we ensured that plan, which was a 10-year plan, had equity in it. Equity just doesn't mean that every school receives the same amount of money. Equity means that our students with the most need receives the resources adequately so that they are prepared to learn at a high level. So I would just ask that Dr. Thornton, if you can just speak to how we ensure that there was equity for our low-income students, because Prince George's County is a highly diverse area and minority, and has about 80 to 90% minority school population. And so how within that, because we have such a high level of minorities, African Americans, and Latin students, how do we ensure that there's equity amongst our school system in this pandemic and the next coming 4 months of online learning?
One of the things that the people of Prince George's County should appreciate is that the Board of Education has, and they should all access it, an equity policy that addresses the mandate that we have of ourselves, Dr. Golson, when it comes to all dimensions of equity. That's the board's policy, and we expect Dr. Golson to implement that policy. So any sub-classification of student, be it poverty status, or be it race, or be it disability, et cetera, any programming that's involved, any budgeting has to run through that equity prism. That is so important. If you look at the plan that Dr. Golson presented to the board and the board approved, you'll see, and please, it's about 150 some odd pages, you'll see a major focus on equity, particularly for special needs students, students with 504 plans, et cetera. It is very, very important that there. The equity dimension it was manifested obviously in starting those people who are eligible, those students who are eligible for free and reduced meals, feeding those students. That was very important. Making sure that those students who had familial situations and IT gaps, making sure that those were closed in the way that my colleagues just mentioned. So that's a top priority. When the Board of Education reviewed Dr. Golson's plan last week, you saw equity right up front. I don't want to occupy the time. I'll close and let Ms. Boozer-Strother comment, but equity is a very important thing. I will take this opportunity, Dr. Washington, to thank you for the Kerwin work, though, because it's very important. Because I said to people, and I'll be very brief, I said to people that before the pandemic, Kerwin said to us, we should be doing the things we're doing. Because what the work that you all did, and you were a member of that from Prince George's County, exposed the gaps that were there before the pandemic. See, those 5 pillars that you all came up with, one of them was, in fact, the IT gap, right? That was before COVID-19. You all spoke to the differential access in terms of based on economic poverty of our students. That was before the pandemic. You all spoke to the need for our teachers. We just talked about that's all there. So what I'm saying is thank you all for saying to us before the pandemic what we should be doing.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. And School Board Member Boozer-Strother, can you just speak to a little bit, I mean, in Edmiston, Riverdale Elementary School and Rogers Heights are the feeder schools there. How do we ensure that those schools, because you're the representative, you represent part of those schools in that area. Can you just speak to how we ensure that there's equity within those schools in comparison to the schools in, let's say, Upper Marlboro or in these other places in Prince George's County?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. And, you know, what Dr. Thornton mentioned about the Kerwin Commission recommendations and the blueprint for Maryland's future, and the focus on the additional resources for the schools that are high concentration of poverty areas. And you're mentioning some of those schools. And, you know, as the District 3 Board of Education member of the 45 schools with 80% or higher poverty rates, nearly a third of the there's 9 districts and nearly a third of those schools are in District 3. So this is a huge concern for this region. And of course, you know, moving into District 4 with the schools, you know, District 2, some of the schools you mentioned. I have to echo what Dr. Thornton said, that, you know, if the legislature hadn't moved what we were, I guess, referring to as the down payment on the blueprint, which identified those 45 community schools to make sure the funding would be there this year that we experienced, we wouldn't have had community schools coordinators placed right at this critical time to reach out to families and find out why they aren't engaging, do everything in their power to engage them. We're hiring the mental health practitioners. We were focusing on mental and behavioral health, which showed up in the distance learning plan, you know, every week, very timely and focused, age grade appropriate level professional school counselor sessions in ways as a parent, I never even knew what my son was experiencing in the building. And now we see all that. And it was all guided through the vision that every student matters. Everyone will engage, the parent engagement assistants, community schools coordinators. We will find all of these students and we'll do everything we can to make sure they're engaged. And that has continued.
So, Ms. Roy, what have been some of the challenges you faced in preparation of instructions for this distant learning? And you're a special needs teacher. So for your students, what are some of the challenges you've faced?
Well, actually, there are many challenges with kids with different learning abilities. Engagement is one of the biggest factors, because distant learning is basically modalities, learning modalities are visual and auditory. And many of our kids with learning differences do not process in that way. So many times distant learning is like one-dimensional. And so they don't, it's very hard. It's not that we can't, but it's more difficult to project lessons in a multisensory way virtually. And,
Right.
you know, with continual training, you know, we'll learn more, but this can be very difficult. And engagement is a big thing. We have kids with autism, and they have attention spans for like 10, 15 minutes max, and they engage in what they enjoy, and that's not necessarily what we're teaching at the time. We have kids with intellectual disabilities, and engagement is really big. And so that's what we're really working hard towards, making sure that there is equity and all children are learning through distant learning and having the same opportunities. And so that has been our biggest challenge of all. I think we're doing a good job, but we still have to be flexible and continue to learn and reflect upon our practice.
So what's your classroom size?
Because I'm in a charter school, some of our classroom sizes are like 10 students, 10 to 15 students, yes, with quite a bit of support. I'm a resource teacher, so I work in the general education classroom, as well as pull the kids out individually.
Right.
And trying to meet them where they are.
So if you could tell me, so your virtual classes, are you teaching, are you moving when you're teaching your students, or is it text? So is it physical when you're teaching your students, or is it textbook in a sense?
Well, it's some of both. You know, we try to incorporate as much as we can so that it's not just necessarily visual and auditory. And then we use a lot of computer-based programs, and that works. And videos, a lot of those that hopefully high interest for the students. And what's helpful is we have a lot of support in our virtual classrooms. Because I push into the classroom with a gen ed teacher. You may also have a social worker. You may have a speech pathologist, a reading specialist, all together pushing into one classroom. Doing a virtual.
Do they also get online?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we're working with them at the same time. And then also, what I've been most happy about is that the kids can contact us, you know, if they need additional help. And so we're always available. And so if we see a child is struggling or whatever, we can contact them, or they can contact us, and we can have private sessions. And that also works. So we're trying, you know, to fill in those gaps, but it is difficult with our kids having different learning abilities.
And Dr. Thornton and Ms. Boozer Struthers, is that the same for Prince George's County with the special education teachers? Are the resource teachers available for the students as well in that manner? Do you know?
I think it would depend upon the learning disability level of the students, right? At a certain level, you would have the kind of resource allocation that Ms. Roy pointed out. There are students who are on another spectrum, then the level of support would not be that intense.
Yeah.
I know want to reduce our class sizes with the support around the teachers that was referenced. That's the ideal.
Yes.
So hopefully
even for those who are not special education, right?
Yeah, we don't want distance education where a teacher without support is responsible for 30 kids.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I on the news this morning, I heard a parent say that it was she had anxiety because she has a special education child, and she had anxiety because she was afraid that she wasn't going to be able to provide the teaching and she wasn't going to be able to provide the homework skills that were necessary after the classes. So she wasn't going to be able to help during the teaching portion and even the after portion. And she said that was worse for her than the virus.
And I think that's, I'm sure Pam would agree with me, that that's one of the things we've been most encouraged about what Dr. Golson is doing, that is providing parent training hubs.
Yeah.
So that parents can come with all of the protections necessary to places to get trained, to get help, emotional help, to get help with, because these students are in familial situations in addition to the school situation. And our job, to the extent that we can, is to stabilize them familially.
The parents are going through the anxiety.
I
What did you say, Maria? You're muted.
Yes.
Yes.
And my husband will testify to this. It's you get this nervous feeling and you get anxiety because, as I said, in my case, I have my 6-year-old. Something as simple as to start teaching my 6-year-old how to do sounds. It's difficult when you're trying to engage him. I can imagine when it comes to a special needs kid, how it is, but with my child, how to engage him and how to have his attention for 30 minutes. We started working with 30, 25-minute gaps and then let him play a little bit. But then you get that feeling of, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough for my child? And in my case, as I said, I was able to stay at home. But then my mind goes to think about those parents that don't have the same opportunity of staying at home, that they have to go away maybe because they have to work, and they have to leave their child or small kid or their teenage kid at home alone or with another person that takes care of them, and maybe they're not getting the same attention. So that's when you get even more anxiety of when is this going to end? And right now, I mean, I think it has to be a group kind of like work. You know, you have to work with your teachers. You have to engage. I think as parents, we have to try to engage more with our teachers. We have to engage with those who can help us, because there's no other way. I mean, this is going for the long run. I honestly don't think that this is going to end anytime soon unless we all put a part of it. But yeah, I do get what you're saying about the anxiety. Oh, too much.
Yes. Thank you. We're going to move into our third segment, and it's post-COVID-19 in education. And I just want to know if our board representatives feel that there will be any major cuts in our budget in the wake of the pandemic.
I've been kind of hoarding the time, so I'll let my colleagues speak first and then I'll speak.
You don't want to say.
That's how you keep peace on the board, Mayor Gant.
So, certainly, we're, without infusions from federal government resources to stabilize the education budget in Maryland, and for this school year budget stable, but we're looking at the next budgets, and I think it's pretty clear to us that the revenues are needed at the state level, and the state funds and the county funds coming together to fund the board, to fund PGCPS. I mean, everyone's looking at, I know folks all, I still hear, what about the lottery funds? What about the casinos? And Delegate Kaiser had a hearing, looking at those revenues, and what we could expect in, the lockbox. And I mean, certainly very concerned. We're part of a statewide coalition called MABE, with the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. And we're very fortunate to have that statewide connection to other board members and a very experienced staff that helps us understand, the implications of revenue in Annapolis. So, of course, I would of course defer to Delegate Washington and otherwise if we were, talking about state revenues. But yeah, we're certainly concerned.
That's one of the things that the board is planning right now, Mayor Gant. We're anticipating, as any responsible governing body would do, of anticipated revenue cuts that may come out of necessity from our General Assembly, the governor, our county executive, and council. So the board responsibly is planning now for anticipated cuts. That's what any board would do. And so we won't wait until January when they might come. We are planning for options. What if, because we do not want surprises. While doing that, we certainly want to advocate that not happen. That's why we're asking for federal funding to stabilize state funds and local funds. That's why the decisions being made in Washington right now is so important to everything that we're talking about. And then we have to have a discussion. I hope you'll bring us back to have a discussion about the long-term revenue stream that comes into support public services and education. That's a long-term discussion. I saw a discussion about that in the community recently. That has ended now, but we have to return to that, because what we have now, and Delegate Washington saw that with what we call the local share affordability. We do have to discuss this as a community, how we have a revenue stream that can support the level of education and services that we want for our children. That's a long-term discussion. Bring us back, if you would, Mayor Gant, so we can have that discussion.
Indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton, for that. And I'm sorry, Ms. Maria Jose, did you want to hop in here?
No, I just wanted to add something. I feel like if there's any cuts or if there's any additional funding that's going to be used, I feel like it's important for parents to engage their local and state governments, to request those resources to be implemented for their schools, to be used for those underserved families that really need the access, for example, to technology, like Ms. Boozer said, to high-speed energy, to school meals, to special needs programs. I feel like there's, like Ms. Roy said and Ms. Boozer said, teachers have been great. And I think that also resources have to be allocated for teachers. I was lucky enough that my son's teacher was available at all times, but his classroom is small. I don't think that's the case to many schools, that the classes are bigger and maybe the teachers have not the time to speak to 30 kids. But I feel like it's important for parents to engage those people that can help you out, to speak up and to request those things that are needed for them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think with the budget, and there's a budget shortfall in the state of Maryland, I want residents to know this at home as taxpayers. There's about a $2 to $3 billion budget shortfall in the state of Maryland. And so what that means is that we have a $46 billion budget. So that's a large chunk of money that we'll be taking from all places throughout the state. And that's due to sales tax revenue being down and many other tax revenues that we are not receiving due to the shutdown. So that's been hurting us for a while. And so as Dr. Thornton mentioned, we really do need the federal government to step up to the plate. So I encourage you to talk to your congressperson, your senator, to ensure that they hold the line, to make sure that we get adequate funding we need to the tune of $50 billion coming to the state of Maryland altogether to help stabilize our economy and help stabilize our local government, our local and state governments. So that's really important, and with that money, we can use that money for technology. And I wanted to ask Dr. Thornton or even the teacher on the panel to talk about the needs of students that you see right now or that you've seen in the past of technology and what more do we need to do for them to ensure they have that they're connected to the internet and they know how to use the appropriate tools so that they're educated at home.
Yes, I think that ongoing training for both teachers and students is very important. Distant learning should not just go away when this pandemic ends. It should not, because it can be used throughout the year, and it could be very effective. I think that our kids catch on to technology very easily. You know, they just need some additional training, and most of them, the typical student, enjoys using technology. Of course, playing games, and a lot of our kids are engaged in math and reading programs using technology, and that seems to be very, very effective. And so I think if you can get them engaged in that way, you know, and then when it's time to sit at the computer for 20, 30 minutes and engage in a math or reading program, and they do that maybe on a daily basis, then when we speak of distant learning, it's a little easier for them because we've already prepared them in that way and engaged them in a way that, you know, it's not new, or it doesn't cause any anxiety. And I think when the parents become very much aware of how the technology is helpful, I think they will be just as engaged. I mean, I know that I have parents that attend Google Classroom with their kids, and I think that's wonderful. And so everybody's learning together, and that works well. And I think if we can continue to engage these type of communities, learning communities amongst our students as well as staff, that will be very, very helpful in the future.
As a teacher, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I think there's some benefits that have come out of this pandemic, and this, I believe, is one of them about the future of how we're teaching our students. And Dr. Thornton, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna ask you to answer this question succinctly, and just if you could just tell us just a little bit about distance learning, and what are some of the things that we've learned that were positives that occurred during the end of the school year that we're going to see moving forward, or even enhanced in the upcoming school year?
Well, I think that what we're learning is that we can deliver education differently and much more efficiently, and we can better use the talents of our students, first of all, who can access information in a different way than we've normally been delivering it, that with proper training of our teachers and support, that we can better use their skill sets, et cetera, to teach and learn in a different way. That we can, in fact, access spaces where our children are outside of the school building, not as a substitute, where we can continue their learning, not 8 to 5 or 8 to 3, but anytime they want to access it, as is taking place in some of the schools. Now, I think that's the big learning thing there. The thing that has to happen, though, you said be very, very brief. To me, this is about family, culture, and situation. And I'll stop there, but I would like to explain that at some point.
we only got to 8 o'clock, Dr. Thornton. We got to 8 o'clock. People are at home. They trying to get dinner. Mayor Gant?
Yes. This question, I want to ask each of you, and you take your pick who wants to go first. But eventually, we're going to have to go back to school. And I'd like to know, under what circumstance would you be comfortable in having, let's say, your child or having students return to school? Under what circumstance would you personally, and Delegate, I want you to answer that question as well. Would you be comfortable in having the students return back to school?
Well, seeing as though I am, thank you for asking that question, Mayor Gant, but seeing as though I'm a single pet dad and I don't have any children, I'm gonna leave it up to our parents
to answer that question.
Decision on when to feel comfortable. But I'm not gonna feel comfortable until our parents feel ultimately comfortable, which is why I'm glad our school system made this decision to do distance learning until we're all extremely safe to be around each other for such a long time. So
that's a good political answer. I like that. I like that. But I just want to mention, we talked about technology. I'm a grandparent, and I have two grandchildren that go to Rogers Heights, and I took part in a class. They taught us how to go online and teach or learn how to do Zoom or the virtual classes. And that helped me tremendously. So I think if they continue that, that would help parents how to, how to sneak and peek and teach their children. Because as the children get older, you really don't know if they're doing their classwork or not. And so that really helped me kind of pay attention to what my sixth grader was doing, and I have a third grader as well. So if the parents could continue to do that, Rogers Heights did a huge thing for me. So that gave you a little time to think about how would you feel comfortable sending your children back to school. So whoever wants to go first, go. Dr. Thornton?
Well, I have, as I said, I have 3 grandchildren in the school system. And what I'm looking for when it comes to this is at the level of the governor, our county executive, our state health people, and our county health people being of one mind, whether it's public school or private school. You hear that discussion, right? We are one mind. And this is the standard where we all will agree as the condition in which we will send our babies back to school. There'll be no differences about that. That's the most important thing, right? It's about the standard that all leaders for all schools and all babies agree that this is a safe environment. Now, I think that ought to be a very high environment that has testing for everybody, for the teachers, for the staff, for the students, for everybody. But most importantly, from the governor all the way down to the health official in Prince George's County, that there's agreement and there's no difference between private school and public school or any other school.
Okay.
Well, I'm a parent.
That was
I'll
good.
jump in. Well, I mean, I've been pretty vocal about my views on public health and safety first. I certainly fully support the distance learning through January 31st because, listening to the experts, it's clear this could get worse before it gets better. I think, sadly, we watch from Georgia returning to school to Indiana to college campuses. We're seeing what happens when you open under these environments. Devastating, stories coming out of 260 students and administrators, big, numbers, and having to backtrack the plans. But, it's the health. I mean, these families are not going to, have folks who can't work, who may have long-term consequences, and some may die, and just unacceptable. I think reaching the point with enough, if we return, I was listening to a vaccine expert who, was sort of said some news to me that I'm really having to sit with, that once we vaccine, this still could be years before we reach, these safety levels I think we all imagine a vaccine will create. And, I can't even imagine my 10-year-old with the masks and distancing, that to not be able to be a kid at school, that there's consequences to that as well. And I know it from my 10-year-old son, how difficult this has been. He was very socially isolated in our home, and thankfully, we are learning some ways to have small groups together safely. Our nonprofits, such as Joe's Movement Emporium in my district, have figured some of this out. It's not just childcare. They are actually, also there to be the partner to the teachers in the school for this. So we need to, we'll be learning some things, but, even with the testing and the contact tracing, I worry about that masks become a discipline point. I just imagine, my son being yelled at all day about his mask. It's, many other elements to this, about that return, and parents won't be able to be in the building. The parent-teacher relationship that we have online, PTAs, and how, PTAs are going to have a huge role and safe ways to bring us together outdoors. Because I don't even know when as a parent I'll get to enter a school building in a significant way. So there's so much to think about beyond the illness and death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good points.
Me, I think I was vocal with Mayor Grant as well when she initially asked me to participate in this. Because as a parent, my needs are not precisely the same ones as others, or what I have is not the same as others. My children don't have special needs, for example. So I was vocal to her in mentioning that in my case, I don't feel comfortable yet with my kids going to school. And for them to continue school online was the best approach. And I was very happy when PG County decided to do online learning. Obviously, that brings a lot of issues for other families, as I said, that are underserved, that rely on programs that PG County gives. And as I mentioned, to me, it's important that parents approach those elected officials to make sure that their needs are met during this time, because we know that we're not going to come back to school until January. And we don't know yet if by January we're going to be ready to go back to school. In my case, Ms. Boozer mentioned she has a 10-year-old. In my case, I have a 6 and a 4-year-old. And how do you keep a 4-year-old with a mask all day? It's almost impossible. But to me, it's important that safety that the school provides, and that also relies a lot on the teachers. And to me right now, it's very, very important that parents come together and come to their elected officials, mention their needs, what they need to continue with this online learning the best way possible. If you need technology, mention it. If you need those meals that you relying on initially, mention it. I'm pretty sure that elected officials are going to be able to provide those things if you request them or try their best to do it. But to me right now, as I said, I don't feel comfortable yet. Hopefully, eventually, we're going to reach a point in which that curve is going to start down. I think we all have to come together to be able to reduce that curve as much as possible. For kids to be able to go back to their social environment. I was lucky enough also that my kids were having Zoom meetings, and they were able to have Zoom meetings in which they were also saying what they were doing. And that was part of the school to be able to have not only those classes that they were having, not only those Zoom meetings for classes, but also to mention what they were doing, show their skills and show their talents, for them to continue that social experience that they have in school and to talk to their friends. And I think that's another thing that maybe schools can do, not to only have that set classes, but also special programs for the kids to be able to still having that social approach that they're missing at home, because they're at home. They also need that social environment to feel that they still have their friends with them.
And final words, Ms. Roy.
Before returning to school, I think a lot of accommodations will need to be made to ensure the safety of the kids. And it even starts when the kids come to school on the school buses. I mean, you want to have social distancing there when they come and they're, going to the cafeteria for lunch. I mean, I don't know if you can have large groups for lunch. Even the restrooms will have to be modified. I mean, it's just a lot of provisions that'll have to be made. I mean, what happens in gym class, what happens at recess time. I mean, the norm will just look so different as I envision it for our students, even when we do return. I mean, because I don't think this is, going away. So I think a lot of thought and a lot of resources have to go into what school's going to look like when we return. And, a lot of us feel it's not safe, but I think we have to jump on the horse and try to ride with accommodations and provisions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I greatly appreciate all of your comments. Thank you so much for joining us tonight panelists, I greatly appreciate your expertise. I thank you for your candid answers, your thoughts. I thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. And thank you, Dr. Thornton, for promising to come back again. I greatly appreciate my co-host, Delegate Washington. Thank you, Pamela.
What, Mayor? You're not going to invite me back again?
Absolutely, absolutely. Ongoing, Delegate Washington. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela Boozer Struthers, for coming out. I appreciate you so much. And our teacher, Ms. Roy, and our parent, Ms. Toledo, thank you so much for your candidness, and we appreciate your hearts so much. I'd like to just let everyone know that we have future Edmonston talk shows in September. We're going to focus on health and the pandemic. In October, we're going to talk about business, economics, and the pandemic. And in November, it's a salute to town heroes during this pandemic. And please tune in. And also we have Camp Ed videos during this pandemic. Right now you can tune into our website. We are talking about our Camp Ed, the video is about farming. Yeah, so tune into our website. We show that video at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. They're also exciting and is brought to you by Steel Beach Productions. So thank you so much again. We're going to sign out. Everyone, be safe and thanks. All right, we're out. Thanks so much.